welcome to part 2 of Mr. Lang's vlog review on Madison to Jackson, specifically this time, Jackson. So now Jackson is president, and because of that, he does many different policies, we'll say, that do make him seem a little, too in charge. But we'll go over all that. So, check it out. First thing is the Tariff of Abominations. Now, the tariff battles really went like this. First, you had the Tariff of 1816, which put an import on cheap textiles. Then you had 1824, which goes ahead, adds a tariff on iron goods and more expensive woolen and cotton imports. Then you have a tariff of 1828, also known as the Tariff of Abominations. This one puts higher tariffs on imported raw materials like wool and hemp, again used mainly for paper and clothing. Now, this was supported by the Jacksonians, which are people that followed Andrew Jackson to gain votes. The South, though, was adamantly against it. A lot of it's because, like discussed earlier, now the tariff forces them to buy the expensive goods from the North. Because with the tariff, over 25% duty and sometimes more, it made those inexpensive goods that are imported go up past and may cost even more than those expensive goods. So they had to buy from the North. The South did not like that. So the Tariff of Abominations overall favors the industrial North. It's hated by the South. And South Carolina argues for what we call nullification. Now, nullification, this whole issue of nullification, comes to a head in the Webster-Hayne debate. Senator Daniel Webster from Mass goes up against Robert Hayne from South Carolina. Again, Massachusetts being from the North, we obviously were for the tariff. It makes business go through the roof. The South was against it. Now, the Webster-Hayne debate is very interesting because, of course, you have John C. Calhoun, who's the vice president at the present time, argued that a state should have the power to nullify a federal law if they consider it unconstitutional. This is nullification. The debate ensued. This is very similar to the Virginia-Kentucky resolutions we talked about when we talked about the Alien Sedition Acts. Again, nullified it if a state thinks it's unconstitutional. Now, Jackson was for the tariff, and Calhoun was not, which made Calhoun actually resign from the vice presidency in 1832, leaving almost a year. We didn't have a vice president, technically, when Martin Van Buren comes in afterwards. Now, South Carolina was so mad about the tariff, they threatened to secede and void the tariff, like in 1832. This is 30 years before the Civil War, 29 years. So he persuaded Congress to pass the Force Bill in 1833. Jackson did there, and that allowed the federal government to use the Army and Navy against South Carolina if they actually resisted to pay their duties. So, and he made good on his threat. In fact, Henry Clay said that Jackson said that if he ever saw John C. Calhoun, he would hang him from the first tree that he saw. Now, Henry Clay, the great compromiser, as we know, he steps in, proposes a tariff that would gradually lower the duties over the 10 years' time, and they were okay with this. And of course, many political cartoons had a field day with this. Now, Jackson's Native American policy is less than good. He actually puts through in 1830 the Indian Removal Act, which then brought the Cherokee Nation versus the state of Georgia, which even went further and brought the Worcester versus the state of Georgia in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court case was pivotal because Worcester, who was a chief at the time, a Cherokee chief, resulted that the Cherokee Nation won the recognition as a community, and Georgia could not invade their lands because Jackson wanted to remove them from their lands. They had good farming land there, and that Native Americans, he thought, would just go, and he could have that land to farm. Americans could have that land to farm. So what the result was that the Chief Justice John Marshall says that he favors and he votes in favor of Worcester. And of course, Jackson likes to get his way. So Jackson says John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. What does that mean? Jackson goes ahead and forces the Cherokee to sign the Treaty of New Echota, which actually forced them to leave their lands and sell it to the federal government for $5 million because he wanted that land that bad. Now, the Cherokee Nation, as you can see, is mainly in Georgia, a little bit of Alabama, a little bit of Tennessee, and altogether we're going to have these 5 nations who are going to go on what we call the Trail of Tears. It's going to be the Seminole, the Cherokee, the Creek, the Choctaw, and the Chickasaw are all going to go to this new territory called the Indian Territory. Now it's present-day Oklahoma. And that Trail of Tears, altogether, we're going to lose about 2,500 to 3,000 Native Americans on this trail as they literally gather their things and move out there. And of course, there's many political cartoons that show otherwise. Jackson's professed love for Native Americans. Now, the bank is a whole different issue. Jackson does not like the bank. In fact, Jackson doesn't like paper money, which is ironic because he's on paper money. He's on the $20 bill. But he uses the federal power to veto the charter for the Second National Bank. And so starts another debate, this time between Nicholas Biddle, who was kind of an arrogant aristocrat from Philadelphia, but again, president of the bank, owner of the bank. President Jackson felt paper money was useless, and so he's going to be adamantly against it. So the opposition literally comes between soft paper and specie, or hard money. Now, state bankers felt that it restrained their banks from issuing banknotes freely, this whole soft paper, and supported rapid economic growth and speculation. Again, paper money being buying almost on credit at that point. Versus hard specie was felt that the coin was the only safe currency. And they didn't like any bank that issued banknotes. And of course, they were suspicious of any type of speculation, any type of credit. But the monster is destroyed, including the pet banks. In 1832, Jackson vetoes it, the extension of it, the charter expires, and the bank goes bankrupt, which actually leads to not only the downfall of the mother bank, but even worse, leads to the Panic of 1837. And of course, people like King Andrew, losing his power a little too much. So moving right along, the Panic of 1837 was pretty crazy because we have banknotes start to lose their value because of the closing of the bank. Land sales start to plummet. Credit's not available anymore. Businesses begin to fail. And because businesses fail, unemployment rose. Now, the Panic of 1837 literally hit everybody. It was a huge recession for the time. And it spread very quickly. Again, it literally spread in the major cities and then out west eventually. But Andrew Jackson by 1837 he's no longer, he's out, he's enjoying retirement. I always love to do fun facts about him. He has got some great fun facts. He had 2 bullets lodged in his body his entire life. On the last day of his presidency, he had 2 regrets. He was unable to shoot Henry Clay or hang John C. Calhoun. His favorite food was pancakes. Richard Lawrence attempted to assassinate him once. He actually pulled out one gun and it misfired, pulled out a second gun and also misfired. So Jackson tackled him to the ground and beat him. He also had a scar on his arm and his face by his eye because when a British officer during the Revolutionary War, he was a young child, actually struck him with a sword. His wife, Rachel, died a month after he was elected president. She married Jackson after a divorce with their former husband went through. And because the divorce didn't go through, again, a lot of that mudslinging was based on Rachel. He had 11 kids. None of them were his own, including 2 Native American kids. He killed Charles Dickinson in a duel, which actually, Dickinson leaves a bullet near Jackson's heart. That's where it is lies for the rest of his life. That's because Jackson's gun actually misfired. But he actually clutched his chest and shot again, they say. Jackson had a 1,400-pound block of cheese at his famous inauguration party, which had the spiked punch. The cheese got caught in the carpets and stuck up the White House for about a couple weeks after. He had a partner named Pole, and it was moved from his funeral actually because it was cursing so much. And he was almost assassinated in 1833 on board a steamship, but he was attacked when he was attacked by a former Navy officer. But he beat the assassin with his cane. And this is a photo of Andrew Jackson 1 year before his death. Again, he's quite the most controversial president that we've had. He's one of the most controversial for sure. And I hope you learned a lot today between part 1 and part 2. I'll see you guys in class.